Welcome to Philosophy15. I'm Robert Talisse.
I'm Scott Aikin.
And these are 15-minute conversations that are unscripted among two philosophers about whatever might be on our mind. We are, collectively, the authors of Pragmatism, Pluralism, and the Nature of Philosophy. We have also authored together, this is now in its second edition, Why We Argue and How We Should, A Guide to Political Disagreement in an Age of Unreason. And I should also add that Scott and I have a book that's coming out shortly called Democracy in a Divided World. And so we've been thinking a lot about civility and democracy and public argument and ways to assess and evaluate public argument. But today we wanted to talk about a problem that's been on our mind a lot, and we've done several episodes of this series on the Owl of Minerva problem. And Scott has discovered a new version of the Owl of Minerva problem that crops up at the end of the Enchiridion by Epictetus.
Yeah.
Is that right?
That's right.
Lay it on me.
There's an Owl of Minerva. So, yeah, I mean, once you start thinking about a certain kind of problem, you start seeing it everywhere. And that's what's happened, is they've been thinking about the Owl of Minerva problem, and I'm working on a philosophical commentary with William Stevens at Creighton University on Epictetus' Enchiridion. I was thinking hard about Enchiridion 52, and there's the Owl of Minerva problem there. So, the Owl of Minerva problem is effectively the problem that as you come up with a meta vocabulary to be able to manage your first order thinking, the meta vocabulary then gets brought back down into the first order as either something that infected by issues on the first order or gets used strategically by disagreements on the first order. So the strategies that we have to keep us sort of on the straight and narrow, as it turns out, become strategies that sort of pull us off the rails. Epictetus' 52 is the last bit of the Enchiridion written by Epictetus, or at the very least that Arian puts in by Epictetus. And it effectively runs that you start philosophy by learning the basics of logic, and the whole point of that is so that you can then understand the arguments for certain kinds of ethical principles that make you a decent person. So the Stoics said, look, the whole point of philosophy is to ennoble you, to make you a better person, to live a good life, and to have some clarity with regards to the world and yourself. And so you learn the arguments so that you can get that, and you learn logic so that you can have that. So there's a sort of a weird two-orderedness. You learn the logic first, and then you learn the arguments, and then you get the ethical principles, and that ends up being third in the order of the learning. But the ethical principles and the living the good life is actually first in the order of importance. And so he thinks that there's a sort of a weird double-mindedness. We do the things that are actually of third importance first, and we do the things of first importance third, right? And here's the problem. He thinks that because we start with the logic stuff, what happens is that we actually get really good at rationalizing. And what happens is that then, whenever we get really good at rationalizing, we then manipulate the arguments for the conclusions that we prefer, and as a consequence, don't actually become the good people that we should be. We just rationalize the lives that we've got. Right? And so philosophy that's supposed to be this sort of transformative, ennobling discipline that's supposed to give you the tools to be able to do that, straight and narrowify you, actually gives you the tools for rationalizing you to just go back on your old bullshit as before. And so one of the great ironies of the Enchiridion is him saying to you, I've taught you these principles, I've given you these exercises, I've given you all these ways for you to be able to sort of change your life for the better. The problem is that remember that these tools are also strategies that you can do for just bullshitifying yourself and pulling the wool over your own eyes. Because that's ultimately what right? It's like, with all of the Owl of Minerva phenomena, they're not things that get done to us, they're things that we do to ourselves. Right?
Right.
With every one of these instances, they're occasions for our own self-deception, for our own rationalization. And so again, it's a perfect instance of this owl of Minerva problem, but it's a kind of a metaphilosophical owl of Minerva problem. The philosophy is supposed to be playing this kind of ennobling role, but it turns out that what regularly happens is that philosophy ends up just being another tool for us to rationalize.
Yeah, isn't there a William James quote, or is William James quoting somebody else when he says that philosophical thinking is often just a way to rearrange your prejudices?
That's good. Yeah, right. Yeah. And so, I mean, he certainly seems to think that
for rearranging your prejudices.
And I mean, it happens with the present dilemma in philosophy. He doesn't think that people will actually change their mind. He thinks that philosophy is just a way that, like, all the training in philosophy is just a way for you to just express your natural temperaments, right? So it's like you just get better at being able to argue for the things that you are already committed to and to begin
For non-philosophical
reasons. Yeah.
So philosophy gives you the vocabulary to dress your prejudices up as something other than prejudices.
That's right. Oh yeah.
But sorry.
That feels wrong. It feels like I got changed by some philosophical arguments, but who knows? There's a sort of a weird self-skepticism that arises from this phenomenon.
But hold on. Isn't this what James says philosophy is?
Yeah, and so there's
James kind of just embraces it, right?
James is okay with that thought, and he's like, then as a consequence, we need philosophy as a kind of like, you just kind of try philosophies on to see if they fit.
And right? The point of philosophy is to make you feel at home in the world.
Yeah.
No matter where, no matter what intellectually it takes for you to feel at home in the world, philosophy is the thing that's supposed to provide that kind of comfort.
And this is the reason why that middling sort, like again, what happens in the present dilemma, you've got that kind of middling sort where it's like, I'm a little bit free willist and I'm a little bit
scientific.
Yeah.
I'm a materialist, but I also want to believe in free will,
spiritually stuff. Yeah, right. I think, and so he's willing to tolerate what look from the outside to be contradictions. But look, if the philosophical views aren't really content heavy, they're just more expressions of your temperament. But the temperament's stable, then whatevs, man. So yeah, the puzzle is whether or not those truths about philosophy are true about James's philosophy. You're just like, are you really describing philosophy? Are those truths about philosophy now, or just your expressions of temperament about philosophy?
Right.
Right. So it looks like there's a sort of a self-eating problem, right? It was like a kind of a self-undercutting problem for James's metaphilosophy. There's like, look, once you've taken that view, now your metaphilosophy is just an expression of your temperament. Why is that better than anybody else's, right?
Yeah.
So now, I mean, the thing about the Epictetus point is that he thinks that Epictetus thinks that seeing that phenomenon, and maybe this is the falsity of the Epictetus point, because this is sort of standard Stoic cognitivism, which is that once you see the wrongness of something, you're capable of stopping it.
Right.
Right. And Epictetus seems to think that, like, look, part of the therapy of good philosophy isn't just giving you the tools to be able to think right, but also the tools to prevent yourself from being a rationalizer or a self-bullshitter or something like that. And so the crucial thing for Epictetus is that now the issue is how do we manage our philosophical lives? How do we manage whatever kind of growth that we feel like we're making in philosophy, is distinguishing that growth that we feel like we're making in philosophy from us just being more satisfied with the lives that we've rationalized. So again, how much more comfortable philosophy has made us with our dogmatic commitments and our initial dogmatic commitments coming in. And so the crucial thing is being able to distinguish them. This, by the way, is one of the reasons why the Stoics were like prime targets for skeptical criticism, was distinguishing those things. But Epictetus seems to think that that once we're kind of clear about this, you can kind of have a double mind about how philosophical training is supposed to, on the one hand, make you good at being able to detect bad reasoning. The thought is that you being able to be good at detecting bad reasoning should make it so that you should be able to detect whenever you are rationalizing.
Right. All of this is making it sound, though, that maybe the ancient skeptics are better than all of these, better than all of these guys. Maybe the problem is just thinking that there's some value in feeling comfortable.
But it's both
in your own skin.
It's both the problem and, in some ways, that's the target. I mean, in some ways, that's what the like whenever you're a Pyrrhonist, like whenever you take the Pyrrhonists, that's exactly what the Pyrrhonists even seem to think. Where it's like, what are we looking for? We're looking for ataraxia. Where it's like, I'm not looking for physical ataraxia. The skeptics don't think that skepticism makes you more comfortable physically. They just think that it makes you less. It gives you a kind of a mental placidity with your mind. It sort of takes the sort of the troubledness out of you. Whenever the Pyrrhonists were criticizing the Stoics, they were like, yeah, what happened is that you got into philosophy because you thought that you needed to change your life and you were going to get some truths that were going to make everything clear and give you purpose and all that other stuff and make things fall into place. But whenever you started doing philosophy, it ended up being complicated. There were really good arguments against this view. There were really good arguments against this view. Everything seemed to be garbage. And then what happened? Then you suddenly felt very comfortable in the sort of the perfunctory kinds of clunky views that you had before. And so the Pyrrhonians were like, yeah, here's the lesson of philosophy. Don't change your life. Be okay with how you are, right? Because that's ultimately where the Pyrrhonists end up. They just end up like, look, we're no really different from the folks where we started out. We just know that we can't make progress. Right, we're not even know that we've kind of learned our lesson. We've kind of, and so there's a kind of one of the lessons of the skeptical program is that intellectual modesty yields a weird kind of conservatism. They're almost conformists, right? I mean, the Pyrrhonians are. They're like, yeah, you kind of go along with how everybody else is doing, and you kind of go with what you're naturally inclined to do, and then you maintain this kind of intellectual ataraxia that way.
Huh. So is there a version of this kind of view, though, that sees the ataraxia as the aspiration, but understands the aspiration as pursuable only in the effort to constantly shed the ideas, the commitments that give you comfort? So I'm thinking, there's at least one reading of Socrates that has him
right
this way, that philosophy is practice for dying and being dead. What does that mean? Philosophy is this activity by which you're constantly perturbing yourself. You're constantly rendering yourself.
You're exfoliating.
Good.
Right.
And constantly rendering yourself unfit for the world, sort of un at home in the world, right?
So in some ways, look, I think that the two intellectualist programs that see themselves as sort of inheritors of Socrates, the Stoics, I think in some ways see themselves that way. I mean, there's definitely a sense that the Cynics maybe saw that, right? Yeah. They're like, look, there's a kind of, but it's not a kind of an intellectual shedding. It's truly a shedding of all the creature comforts that you, again, bullshitted your way into thinking that you needed, right? So they all kind of have, and I think that the academics too. The academics don't seem to have that kind of good life perspective on the other side of their challenge, but they do seem to like the idea of the criticism. They seem to enjoy it. I mean, it's definitely their stories of Carneades seeming to really enjoy skewering his opponents and maybe himself, but
I've always had a soft spot for Diogenes, so and so maybe that seems attractive to me as a view of what philosophy is, the sort of the insistence that the world is not something to make yourself feel at home in.
The great irony of Diogenes is that, like, that on the one hand, it's a place where you're at home anywhere.
Well, right? Because everything's so fucked up.
That's exactly it. Why are you smiling? Because everything's so terrible. All right. Philosophy 15, folks.
See you next time.